I didn't expect much when I moved into that old apartment building on Willow Street. The listing had called it quiet, private, and full of character, which usually means creaky floors, thin walls, and plumbing older than I am. But the rent was fair, the location was perfect, and, honestly, I just needed a fresh start. I still remember the first time I met her. She was waiting in the hallway outside the unit, holding a small ring of keys in one hand and a clipboard in the other. Mrs. Elara Whitmore, my new landlady. She wasn't what I expected. She looked to be in her early 40s, maybe a little older, but she carried herself with a kind of quiet grace you don't see often. Her dark hair was pinned back loosely, a few soft strands framing her face, and her cream-colored blouse had the faintest trace of jasmine perfume clinging to it, a scent I didn't know I'd remember later. "Ah, you must be Mr. Hale," she said, her voice smooth and low, as though it was used to giving instructions no one questioned. "Yeah," I managed, adjusting the strap of my duffel bag nervously. "Just call me Ethan." She smiled faintly, unlocking the door to my new apartment. "You'll find the place simple but comfortable," she said, stepping aside so I could enter first. "I've owned this building for about 12 years now. It's old, but it has charm." Charm. I wasn't so sure. The walls were painted a soft beige, the wooden floors had a few scratches, and the windows rattled faintly against the summer wind. But there was something warm about it, something lived in. She walked me through the space, pointing out the quirks, how the hot water took a minute to warm up, how the windows stuck when it rained, how the hallway light outside flickered sometimes. At one point, she crouched down to adjust the radiator valve and handed me the keys. Our fingers brushed, just for a second, but I felt it. A tiny, unexpected spark. She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she was just better at hiding it. "The neighbors keep to themselves," she said as she straightened, her tone calm and measured. "It's usually quiet here, unless you make too much noise yourself." There was a playful edge in her voice I wasn't sure I imagined. I nodded, pretending to focus on the keys in my hand, but when I looked up, she was watching me with a small, knowing smile, the kind of smile that stays with you long after you walk away. I didn't realize it then, but that was the beginning. Something in her presence felt steady, grounded, and yet, for reasons I couldn't explain, I was suddenly aware of how close we stood, how small the space felt, and how sharply I could hear the sound of her quiet breathing. That was the first time I thought about those thin walls. I'd only been living there for a few days, and the place was still a maze of unopened boxes and mismatched furniture. That night, I stayed up late trying to assemble a cheap bookshelf I'd bought online. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet where every creak feels louder than it should. The hum of the old refrigerator was the only sound in the room, until the muffled knock came. 3 soft raps against my door. I froze, the screwdriver still in my hand. It was close to midnight. When I opened the door, she was standing there, Mrs. Whitmore, my landlady. Her hair was slightly damp, as though she just stepped out of the shower, and a loose cardigan hung around her shoulders. There was no makeup on her face, just soft, natural lines etched by years of living, and somehow, she looked even more striking like that. "Ethan," she said quietly, almost in a whisper. "Could I ask you to keep it down just a little?" "Oh," I stammered, pushing the door open wider. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was being that loud." She smiled, the kind of soft, patient smile that felt forgiving before I even finished apologizing. But then she leaned a little closer, lowering her voice further, and murmured, "Stay quiet, these walls are thin." There was something about the way she said it. Not sharp. Not scolding. Almost conspiratorial, like we were sharing a secret no one else should hear. I nodded quickly, though for some reason my throat felt dry. "I'll stop now. Sorry about that." Her hand rested lightly against the doorframe as she shifted her weight. I noticed the pale curve of her knuckles, the faint shimmer of moisture on her skin from the shower steam she'd just left behind. And for a moment, she didn't move. Neither of us did. I could hear the soft hum of her breathing, steady but quiet, like she was measuring each second that passed. My own heartbeat felt louder than it should have been. She finally glanced past me into the apartment, eyes skimming over the stacks of boxes and tools scattered across the floor. Her gaze lingered on the half-assembled bookshelf, and she let out a soft, amused breath. "You're determined," she said, her voice warmer now. "Or stubborn," I admitted, smiling faintly. That earned me a quiet laugh, the kind that didn't fully escape her lips but still softened her expression. She shifted back slightly, her hand falling from the doorframe. "Well, get some rest when you can." "And Ethan?" "Yeah." Her eyes met mine, steady but unreadable. "You'll find this building has a way of making you hear more than you expect." And then she turned and walked away, the soft click of her slippers fading into the silence of the hallway. I closed the door slowly, leaning against it for a moment, trying to steady the strange mix of thoughts running through my head. The walls really were thin. But somehow, it wasn't the noise I was worried about anymore. The rain had been falling since dawn, a steady rhythm against the old glass panes. It was the kind of gray morning that made the whole building feel smaller, quieter, as though the world outside had vanished into mist. I was heading downstairs to check the mailbox when I passed the open doorway to the shared kitchen. She was there. Elara stood by the window, cradling a ceramic mug between both hands, her dark hair pulled into a loose knot at the nape of her neck. The soft light of the cloudy morning caught the faint lines around her eyes, giving her this gentle, lived-in elegance I was starting to notice more than I should. She glanced up when she heard me. "Morning," she said, her voice low and smooth, like she didn't want to disturb the hush of the rain. "Morning," I replied, a little awkwardly. "Smells good." She held up the mug slightly. "Freshly brewed. There's plenty if you want some." I hesitated, then stepped inside. The kitchen was warm, the air carrying the rich scent of coffee mixed with something softer, jasmine again. It was becoming familiar now, that faint, lingering fragrance that clung to her without effort. I poured myself a mug and slid into the chair across from her at the small wooden table. She watched the rain for a moment before speaking. "This place was my husband's idea," she said suddenly, her tone casual but threaded with something softer underneath. "He loved restoring old buildings. Said they had stories hidden in the walls." I glanced at her, but she didn't look back. Her eyes stayed fixed on the raindrops sliding down the glass. "You still believe that?" I asked gently. A faint smile tugged at her lips. "Some days. Other days, I just think about how many pipes need replacing." I laughed quietly, and for a moment, she joined me, a soft, fleeting sound that warmed the gray morning. Then silence settled between us again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it felt grounding. She shifted slightly, wrapping her hands tighter around her mug. "It's been a long time since I've had someone else living in the building who actually talks." I nodded, sipping my coffee. "Guess I'm old-fashioned that way." Her gaze finally met mine, steady but unreadable. "Not old-fashioned," she said softly. "Just, different." Something about the way she said it made my chest tighten, though I couldn't have explained why. I looked down at my mug, tracing the chipped rim with my thumb. "I like the quiet here," I murmured. "Feels safe somehow." She studied me for a moment longer, then smiled faintly, the kind of smile that said more than words could. Outside, the rain kept falling, soft and endless. Inside, the air between us felt heavier, warmer, as though the room itself had leaned closer just to listen. For the first time, I realized I didn't just like living there. I liked being near her. The afternoon sunlight drifted lazily through the hallway windows, spilling soft, golden rectangles across the worn wooden floorboards. I'd been meaning to get more air into my apartment, so I decided to tackle the stubborn old window that refused to open. I was halfway up a small ladder, struggling with the warped frame, when I heard her voice behind me. "Careful up there." I glanced down and saw Elara standing at the base of the ladder, holding a small tool set in one hand. Her cardigan was the same soft gray as the clouds outside, and her hair was tied back loosely, a few strands brushing against her cheek. "It stuck again?" she asked, setting the tools down beside her. "Feels like it hasn't been opened since the building was built," I said, forcing a laugh as I wiggled the frame. She stepped closer, inspecting it from below. "The wood swells when it rains," she murmured, resting her hand lightly on the window frame near mine. "You have to lift it just a little before sliding." Her fingertips brushed against the back of my hand, so faintly I almost convinced myself I imagined it. But I didn't. I shifted slightly, adjusting my grip, and she reached up instinctively to steady the ladder. "Hold on," she said softly. "Come down for a second." I descended slowly, feeling her presence just inches away as I moved past her on the narrow ladder. When I reached the last step, my balance wavered slightly, and without thinking, I caught her hand to steady myself. It was supposed to be nothing, just reflex. But then I didn't let go. Not immediately. Her skin was cool from the draft slipping through the window's edges, but beneath that coolness, there was warmth, a quiet, steady warmth that traveled from my palm up my arm in a way I wasn't ready for. I glanced up, and she was already looking at me. We stood there, frozen, neither of us moving, our hands still touching. The hallway had gone silent except for the faint tick of the old radiator nearby. I could hear my own breathing, slow and uneven, and hers, softer, more controlled, but just as deliberate. After what felt like an eternity, she broke the moment first. Her gaze lowered, and she gently withdrew her hand, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You've got it from here," she said quietly, her tone carefully neutral. I nodded, stepping back, giving her space even though every instinct wanted me to stay right there. "Yeah," I said, my voice lower than I intended. "I'll manage." She gave the faintest smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes, and turned to leave. I stood there long after she disappeared down the hallway, my hands still tingling where hers had been. That window was still stuck. But somehow, I didn't care anymore. It was close to midnight when I returned from a late shift at the cafe. The rain had finally stopped, but the air outside was still damp and heavy, clinging to my skin as I unlocked the front door of the building. The hallway was quiet, except for the soft hum of the old radiator. The light above flickered faintly, throwing shadows across the walls. And then I saw her. Elara stood at the far end of the hallway, locking the door to the laundry room. Her hair was loose tonight, falling around her shoulders in soft, dark waves. She wore a simple black sweater and faded jeans, but somehow, she looked effortlessly elegant, like she always did. She turned at the sound of my footsteps. "Late night?" she asked, her voice low, carrying just enough to reach me in the stillness. "Yeah," I said, adjusting the strap of my bag. "Double shift. Thought I'd be the only one awake." Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile as she slipped the keys into her cardigan pocket. "This building has a way of keeping you up," she said softly. I hesitated, then walked closer, stopping a few feet away. The air between us felt different tonight, heavier, charged somehow, like the silence itself was waiting for something neither of us wanted to say out loud. For a moment, we just stood there. I noticed the small details, the faint sheen of tiredness beneath her eyes, the way her fingers brushed against the fabric of her sweater like she needed something to hold on to. And then she spoke. "You know," she began, then stopped, as though reconsidering the words. She glanced away briefly, drawing in a quiet breath before trying again. "People would misunderstand us." Her voice was steady, but there was something fragile beneath it, a hesitation that didn't sound like rejection, just fear. I didn't answer right away. My throat felt tight, like any response I gave would tip us into dangerous territory. Instead, I just studied her face, searching for meaning in the slight tremor of her lips, the faint crease between her brows, the unspoken weight in her gaze. "Elara," I said finally, my voice softer than I intended, almost a whisper. She looked up then, and for a heartbeat, neither of us blinked. It felt like the entire hallway had shrunk to the small space between us, our breathing the only sound in the silence. And then, she stepped back. Just slightly. "Good night, Ethan," she murmured, turning away before I could say anything more. I watched her disappear into the shadows at the end of the hallway, the soft sound of her door clicking shut echoing faintly. I stood there for a long time afterward, staring at the empty hallway, the quiet pressing in on me like something unsaid. It wasn't rejection. It was restraint. And somehow, that was harder to live with. The storm rolled in just after midnight. At first, it was just the soft patter of rain against the windows, but within minutes, the wind howled down Willow Street, rattling loose shutters and moaning through the narrow alleyways. The thunder came next, deep, rolling rumbles that made the old glass panes shiver in their frames. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment, half reading a book I wasn't really following, when the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The sudden darkness was thick and absolute. The quiet hum of the radiator stopped, and all I could hear was the rain hammering the roof and the distant growl of thunder. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps against my door. I opened it to find Elara standing there, a small flashlight in hand. The faint circle of light fell across her face, highlighting the damp strands of hair sticking to her temple, the loose cardigan pulled tightly around her shoulders. "Power's out," she said softly, her voice barely rising above the roar of the storm. "Thought you might want some candles." I nodded, stepping aside as she entered. "Thanks," I said, my voice sounding lower than I intended. She set the candles on my table, and we lit them one by one. A warm, flickering glow filled the room, throwing soft shadows across the walls. Outside, the storm raged on, but in here, the stillness felt strangely fragile, as though even our breathing might disturb it. "I hate nights like this," she admitted quietly, pulling her cardigan tighter. "When the power's out, the whole building feels older. Like it remembers things." I smiled faintly, settling on the couch across from her. I thought you liked old buildings. I do, she said, returning my gaze. Just not when they creak in the dark. We sat there in silence for a while, listening to the rain. The storm made the world outside disappear, leaving just the two of us in this small, candlelit space. Then it happened. A crack of thunder split the air, loud and sudden, shaking the windowpanes. She flinched, and before I could think, her hand reached for mine. It was instinct, nothing more. But when her fingers wrapped around mine, neither of us moved. Her skin was warm, soft, and I could feel the faint tremor of her pulse beneath her touch. My breath caught, but I didn't say a word. The silence stretched between us, heavier than the storm outside. Finally, she spoke, barely a whisper. I should, probably get back. I nodded, though neither of us let go right away. When she finally pulled her hand back, it felt like something inside me shifted, leaving a quiet ache behind. At the door, she glanced back, her face half-lit by candlelight. "Good night, Ethan," she murmured. I watched her disappear into the hallway, the storm swallowing the sound of her footsteps. And in that fragile silence, I realized something I hadn't dared admit before. I didn't just want her near me. I needed her near me. By morning, the storm had passed. The world outside looked freshly washed, the streets still damp beneath a pale stretch of early sunlight. The old apartment building creaked softly in the warming air, its silence broken only by the occasional drip of water sliding off the gutters. I hadn't slept much. I lay on the couch most of the night, staring at the fading candlelight, listening to the storm rage and then slowly die away. I kept replaying the moment her hand slipped into mine, the warmth of it, the quiet steadiness, the way she didn't pull away immediately. It was impossible to forget. I was still lost in those thoughts when a gentle knock came at my door. I hesitated for a moment before opening it. Elara stood there, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. Her hair was loosely tied back, a few damp strands framing her face, and she wore an oversized cream sweater that looked soft enough to dissolve into. "Morning," she said softly, her voice warm in a way I hadn't heard before. "I thought you might need this." I stepped aside, and she came in without a word, setting the mugs on the small table near the couch. The air smelled faintly of roasted beans and something sweeter, jasmine again. Always jasmine. "Thanks," I said, wrapping my hands around the mug she handed me. My fingers brushed hers as I took it, and the tiny spark of contact was almost enough to make me forget to breathe. She settled beside me on the couch, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from her body, but not so close it seemed intentional. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sunlight spilled lazily through the half-open blinds, falling across the soft curve of her shoulder. I caught myself stealing glances, wondering if she could hear the quiet pounding of my heartbeat in the silence. And then she looked at me. Really looked at me. "About last night," she began, her voice low and careful. I waited, unsure if I wanted to hear what she was about to say. Her gaze flicked to our hands resting near each other on the couch cushion, then back to my face. A small, almost shy smile touched her lips as she whispered, "Stay quiet, these walls are thin." But this time, it wasn't a warning. It wasn't playful. It wasn't distant. It was a confession. Neither of us moved for a long moment, and yet everything between us shifted. The space felt smaller, warmer, softer, like the entire room was holding its breath. Finally, I nodded, letting out the smallest laugh, low and nervous. "I can do quiet," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her smile deepened, and without looking away, she reached for her mug, taking a slow sip. Our shoulders brushed as she leaned back, and neither of us moved apart. The walls were thin, yes. But in that quiet morning light, it didn't matter anymore.